I am about to go to Africa to provide support. People around me have known about this for a long time, but my wife, who I have been married to for 4 years, does not know it. Stella, we used to love each other so much. I don't know when it started, but I was no longer in her world, and all her attention was on her white moonlight, Richard. That day, at the class reunion, I originally thought it would be a simple gathering, but it was destined to be a turning point in my life. Richard's existence is like a thorn that has penetrated deep into my heart, and I cannot extricate myself from it. At the party, he teased me in fluent French, saying that my wife thought I was a manual sanguina and he was the automatic Lamborghini. He sarcastically said that I was not worthy of being with her and that he was her ideal type. At that moment, the wife lowered her head silently without refutation, and even when Richard asked her if it was really the case, she awkwardly answered yes in French. I stood there in a daze, and all my friends who knew French turned to look at me, their eyes full of sympathy and doubt. Yes, I knew that she no longer had me in her heart. However, what my wife didn't know was that I had already secretly learned French. I didn't want to stand in front of her ignorantly and endure humiliation any longer. That yes seemed to push me into the abyss. I decided to give up on her completely. I picked up the phone, contacted a lawyer, and prepared to draw up a divorce agreement. Stella and I had no children, and our property was not complicated. I even decided not to share a penny. I just want to leave her world completely, go far away to Africa, start a new life, and escape from this ridiculous triangle relationship. When the divorce agreement was placed in front of me, my heart beat faster. I looked at the 2 pages of concise documents and felt a sense of strangeness and pain. Without any explanation, I just need her to sign, and then we are done. The only responsibility letter in the house, where she will sign her name. When I got home, I took out the divorce agreement from my bag and handed it to Stella. The school has a safety responsibility letter that needs to be signed. Could you please sign it for me? I lost both my parents when I was young and was left alone. Stella, the woman I married, was my only family in this world. When I pretended to be calm and took out the stack of documents, saying that it was the school's safety responsibility letter that needed her signature, she frowned slightly and reached out to take it for a closer look. At that moment, my heart suddenly tightened. I really didn't expect her to do this. Normally, Stella is indifferent to my affairs, especially a month ago. After Richard divorced and returned home, her attitude towards me became even colder, almost perfunctory to the extreme. I subconsciously clenched the divorce agreement in my hand. My fingertips turned white and my heart was in turmoil. I was struggling with whether to hand this agreement, which reflected my determination to leave, to her. I stood at that moment, my inner struggle and hesitation filling my entire chest, as if I was tightly bound by an invisible force. Just when I was deeply in the struggle between my conscience and my conscience, Richard's annoying voice broke my thoughts. Ruyan, what's wrong with you? You are too reserved in front of David, like a dean of studies. David is scared by you. Hearing this, Stella's expression changed subtly. Her originally frowned brows suddenly relaxed, and a smile appeared in her eyes. The atmosphere seemed to become relaxed and joyful in an instant. She reached out and took the document I handed over with quick and natural movements. With a flick of her finger, she signed her elegant name in the place I designated. Watching her finish signing, I had mixed feelings. First, I felt relieved, but then a strong sense of self-mockery came over me. I know clearly that Stella only appears so serious and solemn in front of me. However, once Richard appears next to her, she seems to be a different person in an instant. Her former sharpness was gone, replaced by the aura of a naive little girl. If she had taken a closer look at the divorce agreement, she should have been able to find clues, but she was only focused on responding to Richard's joke. She chuckled and said, "In my heart, I still think of David as my younger brother. As a sister, I must be stricter." When I heard this, my movements suddenly paused, and the scenes of those nights involuntarily emerged in my mind. She was panting under me, burying my face in her chest, but she never said such words at that time. My relationship with Stella must start with my mentor, Professor Liu. My parents died early. After Professor Liu learned about my family situation, he took extra care of me. He often found excuses to ask me to help organize materials and invited me to his home for dinner. Gradually, I got to know Professor Liu's daughter, Stella. Professor Liu is very prestigious in the medical field, but Stella did not choose to be a doctor. In college, she founded her own game studio and became a rising star in financial magazines at a young age. She is not only beautiful, but also rich. So many men are attracted to her, and I am no exception. After I met her several times, I fell in love with her completely. However, I knew clearly that there was a huge gap between her and me and our statuses. So, I hid this admiration deep in my heart. Even when we were sitting at the same table for dinner, I didn't dare look her in the eye. I could only secretly glance at her a few times, and I would feel satisfied in my heart. Everything changed until that night 4 years ago. On that day, Professor Liu and his wife were on a business trip, and I went to their home to mail a document. When I finished my task and was about to leave, Stella, who was drunk, suddenly came back from outside and fell into my arms. Her movements were so intense that I was completely shocked and froze in my tracks. We then lost ourselves in each other's emotions and ended up making love on the bed. That night, Stella was very emotional and left a big bite mark on my shoulder. She said in a drunken voice with resentment, "You obviously know that I like you." It was not until later that I learned that Richard had a flash marriage that day and married a foreign woman. At that time, I didn't know Richard existed. I just felt that my years of secret love had finally been responded to. In the dark, I left my mark on her body. The next day, my wife came home and found out about all this and confronted us directly. Without any hesitation, I promised to take responsibility. When I reached the legal age for marriage, Stella and I got our marriage certificate. During these 4 years, Stella was busy with work and I lived in school, so we were always apart more than together. Stella was always cold to me, but I always comforted myself by thinking that was just her character. Therefore, I was willing to give her my all and never expected her to give me more enthusiastic response. Until a month ago, I excitedly booked a high-end restaurant to celebrate our 4th wedding anniversary, which was also my 26th birthday. Stella half a month in advance and confirmed with her secretary several times. Stella also promised again and again that she would definitely come. However, that night, I waited from dark until the restaurant closed, but she never showed up. The disappointment and heartbreak in my heart are beyond words, as if this long-hidden feeling has finally been verified in reality. After being asked to leave the restaurant by the waiter, I still couldn't get through to Stella. The anxiety in my heart became more and more intense, and as time went by, I felt myself falling into the abyss of despair. Just then, I accidentally saw a news report about a sudden car accident, and my heart suddenly tightened, as if it was being tightly grasped by an invisible big hand. At that moment, my mind went blank and my heart was beating so hard that I could hardly breathe. In the next 2 hours, I ran around all the hospitals around me like I had lost my mind, scanning every ward and asking every medical staff, just to find Stella. But every time I got a disappointing answer, Stella still didn't show up. When I was exhausted, I finally called Chung Fan, one of the few people around Stella who knew about our relationship. After the call was connected, Chung Fan's voice was a little surprised. "Didn't Rian tell you? Richard is coming back today, and she is arranging a welcoming banquet for him at the hotel." Richard, this strange yet familiar name, Stella had never mentioned it. Hearing Chung Fan's words, I felt an inexplicable anxiety in my heart and hurried to the hotel. When I arrived at the hotel, I couldn't believe what I saw. There was a noisy sound coming from the private room. Through the crack in the door, I saw Stella leaning on Richard's arms. The two of them drank from the cup together, and they raised their heads to drink the whole glass of wine in one gulp. Stella had a smile on her face that I had never seen before. It was a happy look that was completely different from mine. At that moment, my heart was filled with anger and resentment, and I was completely ignited. I pushed open the door of the box, rushed in, and tried to get an explanation. However, when Stella saw me, she was embarrassed. She smiled and introduced me to the people around her. "He is my relative's younger brother." This sentence was like a heavy hammer, hitting the last glimmer of hope in my heart. I finally realized that in these 4 years, I had never really entered Stella's life. She never regarded me as an important person in her life, and didn't even have the slightest emotional fluctuation. Watching her and Richard exchanging the side dishes in their bowls tacitly, I secretly clenched the divorce agreement that I had prepared long ago, and my heart was filled with determination. After the 1-month cooling-off period, I would get the divorce certificate and completely leave Stella, who had never belonged to me. Since then, Richard has rented a house above ours, and he comes down to visit almost every day. Stella used to stay out of the house because she had to work overtime, but now she is suddenly free and is waiting for me at home every day. After they finished their meal, they watched TV in the living room. Once, Richard even invited me to watch it with him in a hypocritical manner. "David, come watch it together." I excused myself by saying that I hadn't finished my graduation thesis yet and went back to my bedroom. Richard's hearty laughter came from behind me. "David is such a good student, unlike me when I was young. I often asked Rian to help me finish my homework." I was busy at my computer until 11 o'clock in the evening, concentrating on writing my paper, and I didn't notice Stella quietly walking into the bedroom in slippers. She reached for the document bag on the table, and my heart skipped a beat. I immediately tried to stop her, but it was too late. Inside was the divorce agreement I had signed. What is this? Stella frowned, pulled out a piece of paper from her file bag, and threw it on the table. I looked closely and found that it was the application form for the school's Aid to Africa project, which I happened to put on the top. This is not mine. I printed it for my roommate. There is no printer in the dormitory. I explained quickly and calmly. Stella didn't seem to think much about it and believed me and was no longer interested in the file bag. I secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but I felt even more bitter in my heart. I don't want her to know about the divorce so soon. After all, this marriage was just my wishful thinking from the beginning, and when I decided to leave, I just hoped to be decent and try not to make myself look too embarrassed. Stella tapped the table with her slender fingers, stared at me, and said slowly, I heard that the aid project in Africa requires 3 years in the poorest part of Africa, which is hard enough. You don't have to join in the fun. Dad's connections are enough for you to find a good job in a hospital in Beijing. When she said this, her tone sounded caring, but my heart was filled with bitterness. I always ranked first in my major in GPA every year and published more than a dozen papers during my graduate studies. With my abilities, if I wanted to work in a hospital in Beijing, I would not need the connection she mentioned. But Stella never understood these things. In these 4 years, she never really cared about me. As for me, I even knew her favorite air conditioning temperature, and I would always turn it down in advance every night. As a result, I would often wake up in the middle of the night and sneeze because of the cold. She never noticed any of this, and I never expected her to care. Today, I don't want to force myself. As expected, as soon as I lay down, Stella started tossing and turning. Why is it so hot today? I'm afraid of the cold, I answered indifferently, then turned over and lay down with my back to her, wrapping most of the quilt around me. I thought she would adjust the temperature herself, but unexpectedly, she reached out and hugged me from behind, and her soft breath sprayed on my neck, carrying an ambiguous atmosphere. Stella's skin was very smooth. After taking off her silk pajamas, she dived into my arms like a fish, and a barrage of kisses instantly fell upon her. I wanted to refuse, but I was powerless. Stella was always so strong in bed, which was completely different from her usual calm and rational appearance. I frowned and tilted my head to look at the digital clock on the bedside. Today is Friday. For 4 years, we have spent every Friday night like this. Before, I simply thought that she was so enthusiastic just because we hadn't seen each other for a week. It wasn't until a few days ago when I was bored and looking through Richard's social media account that I realized that almost every time he updated his videos, they were on Fridays. Richard is a travel blogger. Most of his videos are about traveling around the world with his foreign wife. In addition to taking pictures of the scenery, almost every one of them shows their love. When I think about how Stella's enthusiasm in the past was all due to Richard's stimulation, I just feel sick. Stella finally stopped moving on me. She reached out and turned on the wall lamp. The dim light illuminated her blushing face. There was some confusion in her eyes. What's wrong? I just wanted to stop her from going on, but suddenly I felt my stomach churning and I almost vomited. Let's take you to the hospital to check. Maybe. I heard that sometimes when the mom is pregnant, morning sickness will be transferred to the dad. She said half seriously and half jokingly. No, we take measures every time. It's impossible, I replied, trying to look relaxed. Let's go to the hospital, no matter what. You look pretty uncomfortable right now. As she said this, she had already put on her clothes and picked up the car keys from the bedside. At this moment, Stella's cell phone rang. She took a look at the incoming call and picked it up immediately. She frowned slightly after hearing what was said on the other end of the phone, then smiled helplessly and hung up. She looked at me and said, Richard has a fever and no one is home. Under the light, Stella looked a little hesitant. I understood what she meant, so I said, you go and keep him company. I'm fine. At this moment, Stella's phone rang again. The ringtone was urgent, as if urging her. Stella took a look, stood up immediately, walked a few steps, and then suddenly remembered something, turned around, and said with a guilty look on her face, I'll take you to the hospital later. The moment the door was closed, I smiled bitterly and said, wait? This is the word I hate the most. It always means waiting for someone else's promise, and in the end, nothing will change. I really don't like waiting. The discomfort in my stomach is getting stronger and stronger, and I can't fall asleep at all. So I just sat up and took out the application form for the aid project in Africa. I was originally a little hesitant about whether to go abroad, but the current situation has made me decide to go out and gain some experience for a few years. If I stay in Beijing, I might meet Stella again after graduation. This marriage makes me feel more and more depressed. After thinking about it, I think it would be better to stay away from all these entanglements. When filling out the form, I saw the column for marital status, and without any hesitation, I wrote down single. Stella didn't come back the next night, and the next morning, I saw a post from Richard's account. It said, "I'm at my lowest point, but luckily there are still people willing to go with me to hike Fishtail Mountain at night." The animated picture is a selfie of Richard. The woman behind him has a slim figure. I recognized her as Stella at first glance. The comment section was also full of comments, with many leaving messages. Men who love traveling are really attractive. I'm afraid the people chasing after Brother Yuanyu and have lined up all the way to France. I knew that Brother Yuan would not be devastated after being cheated on by a scumbag woman. He is a role model for our generation. I couldn't help but chuckle when reading these comments. If these fans knew that this female guest was already married, they would probably be shocked. Richard himself left a message in the comment section. "Dear fans, does anyone know the legend of Fishtail Mountain? It is said that lovers who climb to the top of Fishtail Mountain together will be together forever for the rest of their lives." When Fishtail Mountain became popular on the internet last year, I was very excited to go there with Stella and mentioned it several times. But she said coldly, "David, I thought you were not the kind of person who likes to follow the crowd." I had nothing to say and could only give up. We were both going to Fishtail Mountain. I wanted to go and seemed indecisive, while Richard seemed free and easy. This is probably the difference between love and not love. But I really can't understand. If you don't love someone, how can you still have that kind of desire when sleeping in the same bed? In order to prevent what happened last night from happening again, I decided to pack up all my things and never return to this home until I get the divorce certificate. I lived on campus most of the time, so I had very few things at home, and my clothes could fit in a suitcase. Finally, I opened the bedside drawer and took out a thick Polaroid album, which was full of photos of Stella. Every photo was taken from the side, because Stella never cooperated with me taking photos, even when posing. In the photo Richard posted, although Stella only showed her back, from the angle, it was obvious that she cooperated intentionally. When I left, I threw the photo album into the trash can. Love that is ignored is unlucky even for the recycler. Graduation was approaching, and I was so busy that I barely thought about Stella for 2 weeks. After the group meeting on Friday, I looked at the missed calls on my phone and felt a little dazed. For 4 years, no matter what happened, I took the initiative to contact Stella, and sometimes I had to make an appointment with her secretary. She once said, "Phone calls are the most inefficient way to communicate and waste time." Thinking of this, I deleted the missed call notification and planned to ignore the call. Unexpectedly, Stella called several times in a row and sent a WeChat message, "Dad, let's go see him together." Since his wife passed away the year before last, Professor Liu has been devastated and his health has collapsed almost overnight. He resigned from all his positions and took the initiative to move into a nursing home. I used to visit him every 10 days or so, but since a series of events that happened last month, I haven't been there for a long time. I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Although Stella and I could no longer be husband and wife, Professor Liu and his wife's love for me was genuine. I decided to go see him while I was still in Beijing. Stella drove to pick me up and asked as soon as we met, "Why don't you go home recently?" "I'm busy at school." I answered simply. "That's good. Richard thought you were angry that he and I were too close." Stella tapped the steering wheel with her hands, her tone teasing. "I told him that you're not that stingy, but he didn't believe me. He said he was moving out next month to avoid suspicion. You can tell him it's unnecessary." "I don't care," I said lazily, my voice sounding a little tired, as if I was answering an ordinary case inquiry with a flat tone. Stella frowned slightly. She had expected such a simple answer, but when she heard me say it so casually, she felt something was wrong. While waiting for the red light, she wanted to take a closer look at my expression, but I was already fast asleep in the passenger seat. I haven't seen Professor Liu for more than a month. He looks much older. With trembling hands, he opened a box, took out a jade ring, and handed it to me. "David, this is an antique passed down from the ancestors of the Liu family. It is considered a family heirloom. Your wife and I have only one daughter, Ruyan. Now that you and she have a family, she will be half a son to us. Your wife passed away suddenly, and there was no chance to find a solemn day to pass it on to you. I will put it on you today, in case I die someday." "Teacher, don't say that." Looking at the teacher who was once full of vigor and vitality, but now looks frail and old, my eyes became moist. But deep down, I knew clearly that my marriage with Stella was about to end, and this jade ring should not be inherited by me. But Professor Liu still insisted on putting it on my thumb and continued, "Before you were still in school, you and Ruyan didn't have a big wedding. Now that you are about to graduate, you should find time to hold a wedding ceremony. This is also the wish of your wife before she died." Stella and I didn't respond. Professor Liu talked to himself for a long time about the wedding. Then, he took out 2 more tickets and handed them to Stella. "These are given to you too by Uncle Zhou. It's for a musical directed by his son, and it will be performed tonight." "Uncle Zhou?" Stella frowned. Professor Liu immediately smiled and explained. "David recognized him. He is my friend in the nursing home. The last time David came here, he happened to see Lao Zhou, who had a heart attack and fell on the side of the road. He looked at me with pride and continued, 'Thanks to David's timely first aid, Lao Zhou was able to save his life.' He always remembered David's kindness and said that when you hold the wedding ceremony again, he will go to the wedding banquet." "There is such a thing? Why didn't you tell me?" Stella looked at me in surprise. I smiled bitterly in my heart. After I saved the man that day, I sent her several voice messages in a row, but she didn't reply. Then I realized that she had never clicked on the message from me. After leaving the nursing home, I was going to take a taxi back to school, but Stella shook the ticket in her hand and said, "Someone specially left it for you. It would be bad if you don't go and see it." Thinking of Professor Liu and Uncle Zhou's kindness, I took the ticket and decided to go see the musical. On the way, Stella said she had to go home to get her work phone, so the car turned into the community. I thought to myself, she had accompanied Richard on a mountain hike, and her work phone had been ringing in the study all night, but she didn't seem to care. Now, her work suddenly seems so important, which makes me feel helpless. When I think about this, I take off the ring on my finger. This thing does not belong to me, so I should return it to its original owner as soon as possible. Just after taking off the ring, she looked up and saw Richard coming down the elevator. "Stella, no wonder you weren't there when I went to your house just now. Where did you go?" Richard didn't even look at me and walked straight to Stella. I took a step back silently. "What do you want from me?" "Of course I'm looking for you to participate in the competition. I've already prepared a car for you." At this time, I noticed that there were 3 bicycles and a blonde boy in the elevator. I recognized him. His name was Lu Jia. He was an internet celebrity and often appeared in Richard's videos. Lu Jia also greeted them generously and joked, "This is the female guest in your photo. She is indeed a great beauty." He turned his head and looked at me, his eyes full of confusion. "This is—" Richard and Stella were both embarrassed, so I simply pointed at Stella and took the initiative to say, "I am her brother." They didn't say anything else, which was considered as tacit agreement with my explanation. Stella coughed lightly, brought the topic back, and asked Richard, "What game?" Richard smiled and said, "I've signed you up for the night ride around the lake. You won't blame me, will you?" Stella was silent again and looked at me. I shrugged and responded, "You guys go ahead. I just happened to be back at school to sort out my thesis." Lu Jia didn't see the subtle relationship between us and invited me very friendly, "Brother, you can go too. I'm afraid David doesn't like physical activities like cycling." Before I could answer, Richard declined for me. Stella also agreed, "Yes, David is not in good health and is not good at sports." I didn't refute, but I thought to myself, I have been the president of the Sonda Club in school for 3 years, and I have been invincible in the whole department. If Stella knew this, she would probably be surprised and challenge me on the spot. I didn't want to waste any more time here, so I took out the ring I had taken off and handed it to Stella and was about to remind her to keep it. Unexpectedly, when Lu Jia saw it, his eyes lit up and he immediately took it. "Oh my God, this is such a transparent glass jadeite." Richard with envy, "You said a few days ago that you wanted to pick out a good quality Chinese-style accessory, and Stella found it for you so quickly. Why don't I have such a good old classmate?" Richard was a little shy, and Lu Jia continued to tease him. "Richard, try it on and see. This level of jadeite should cost more than $1 million, right?" Under Richard's expectant gaze, Stella hesitated for a moment, but still handed the ring to him. Her eyes were always observing my expression. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw Richard put on the ring. This Liu family heirloom is a hot potato to me. It will end up in Richard's hands sooner or later. It's better to hand it over now. "You guys go have fun. I'm leaving in a taxi." I walked towards the elevator without looking back. The moment my back disappeared, Stella stood there, watching me leave. She watched the elevator door slowly close, and a complicated feeling inexplicably arose in her heart. I went to see the musical alone. The tragic Janufa made me feel inexplicably empathetic. I was so immersed in it that tears flowed unconsciously. The music and the plot are intertwined, as if touching something deep in my heart, and uncontrollable emotions burst out instantly. On the way back to school in a taxi, I accidentally saw Richard's latest updates. He still wore the jade ring on his hand, and he wrote, "Wearing a jade ring and riding a bike around the lake. No one else can do it." In the photo, Stella and his shadow were tightly attached to each other, against the backdrop of the sunset, like a couple made in heaven. I quietly clicked on Richard's account, and without hesitation clicked, no longer following and not interested. When Richard first came into my life, I was like a rat in the gutter, secretly checking his social media feeds, afraid I would miss any news about Stella. But now, I don't care anymore. In the past few years, I have been just a spectator in Stella's life, rising and falling with her laughter and tears. But now, I finally realize that this show may have to end. The day for the launch of the aid project in Africa is getting closer and closer, and I have almost devoted myself entirely to the preparations, keeping myself busy all the time. Some students in the team asked for leave to go home and be with their families, and almost all the remaining tasks fell on me. During those days, I was so busy that I didn't know which way was which. Being busy became my only comfort. I had no time to think about those disturbing emotions. Life seemed to be compressed into simple tasks and schedules. However, 10 days before departure, the team arranged a physical examination. When I learned from the physical examination report that I had a 5-centimeter tumor in my stomach, my mind went blank. The doctor told me seriously, it requires surgical removal and further treatment. At that moment, my heart sank, my vision went blurry, and I was totally unable to accept such news. My mind went blank. How could this happen? I was about to embark on my journey to Africa in a few days. How could this happen? Standing in the hospital corridor, I felt a strong sense of helplessness and confusion. I couldn't help but pick up Stella's number and wanted to call her. Even though I had tried my best to appear strong, I was just a recent graduate. Faced with such a sudden blow, I had nowhere to go and my heart was empty, filled with only pain. After hesitating for a long time, I pressed the dial button, but the moment the phone rang, I subconsciously looked up and saw Stella and Richard walking into the hospital side by side. The two stood together, with the sunlight shining on them, making them look particularly well-matched. Stella frowned when she heard the phone ring and glanced at the incoming call. The next second, I hung up the phone in a panic and quickly hid in a shadow. Watching them walk into a clinic opposite, I felt uneasy and followed them. As I walked past the door of the clinic, I overheard the conversation inside. The doctor warned them in a serious tone. The fetus is not stable yet, so expectant mothers should not do any strenuous exercise, and it is best to avoid sexual intercourse in the next 2 months. Richard's gentle voice came, "Okay, thank you, doctor. We will pay attention." When I heard this, my heart sank, as if all my strength had been drained away. At that moment, I realized the fact that I had overlooked before. The relationship between Stella and Richard was no longer what I had imagined. I turned and hurried away, but outside the corridor, I accidentally bumped into someone. Stella coming out of the clinic. Her eyes quickly locked onto me. "David," she called me, frowning slightly. "What are you doing in the hospital?" I had a stomachache and had a checkup. I held the tumor examination form tightly in my hand, trying to make my voice sound calmer. "Stomachache?" Richard stood up from behind Stella and said in an intimate tone, "I heard from Ryan that you often skipped meals before, which is why you have this problem." I just nodded without answering. I didn't want to continue to embarrass both parties, so I made up an excuse to leave, but I felt a pang of pain in my heart. Just as I turned to leave, Stella reached out to grab me, but Richard pulled her sleeve with a pleading look on his face. "Ryan, you promised me to keep it a secret for the time being." Stella paused and immediately stopped trying to catch up. I walked out of the hospital alone. The world seemed to become so strange all of a sudden. I didn't have any relatives to rely on. After hesitating on the street for a long time, I unknowingly arrived at the door of the sanatorium. Professor Liu was particularly happy to see me. His mind was a little confused, but he was still concerned about my job search after graduation and said he would arrange something for me. In the end, I still couldn't tell them that I had a tumor in my stomach. But I can't forget Stella's ultrasound report. I just took a look at it, and it seems that she was pregnant for 1 month, which happened to be when Richard just came back. Thinking of this, I felt sad. I had longed to have a child with Stella, but Stella always insisted that I wear a condom. Now, only a month after Richard returned, she was pregnant. Before I knew it, I had been sitting alone on the road all night. When the sky was turning pale, I found the number of the medical team leader on my phone. As a medical student, I knew that I couldn't put off the tumor in my stomach any longer. so I wanted to borrow some money to have the surgery done first. This little money was nothing to Stella, but I really didn't want to ask her for more money. Before I could make the call, Stella's message popped up. David, are you free tomorrow night? I've reserved a table at Kumo Town Restaurant, and I have something to tell you. That restaurant was exactly where I had booked on our anniversary. Thinking of the memory of her abandoning me that day, I felt as if it was a lifetime ago. I typed in the dialogue box, okay, I will be there on time. It just so happens that I also need to confess to Stella about the divorce. Since she is already pregnant, maybe we should part ways amicably as soon as possible so that she can marry Richard and have children as she wishes. This is the last thing I can do for her. Didn't you want to come to this restaurant before? Make it up to me today. After parking the car opposite the restaurant, Stella said to me with a little regret. As soon as she finished speaking, she stretched out her hand and interlocked my fingers. This sudden, intimate gesture made my body stiffen. This was the first time in 4 years that Stella took the initiative to hold my hand. I was not used to it and subconsciously tried to break free. Just at this moment, Stella's phone dinged. Stella let go of her hand and looked at her phone. I don't know what she saw, but her pretty eyebrows immediately frowned. She actually stopped in the middle of the street and frantically opened a live broadcast app. I looked over and saw Richard on the screen live broadcasting about cutting his wrists. Stella, whose attention was completely focused on her phone, stood there in a daze, at a loss. I didn't have time to think about it, so I pulled her back, but I was hit by a fast-moving vehicle and fell to the ground. David! Stella finally came to her senses. She glanced at me on the ground, then at the live broadcast on her phone. After hesitating for a moment, she shook her sleeves and said, David, Richard's situation is urgent. I'll go to him first. I fell on the roadside amidst the hustle and bustle of cars and people, watching Stella anxiously leave. I tried to get up, but I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen. I had no external injuries. With my medical student's intuition, I knew that the car accident had caused internal bleeding. The patient has internal bleeding and has lost too much blood. He needs a blood transfusion urgently. There is no type A blood in the blood bank. The patient will be in danger if blood is not transfused. I lost too much blood and was already losing consciousness. I could only vaguely feel my body being moved around, and the sounds of first aid could be heard intermittently. Take mine, I have type A blood. A clear voice came into my ears. I opened my eyes with all my strength and saw the owner of the voice clearly. He looked familiar, but I couldn't remember his name. Just as I was about to say thank you, I lost all my strength and fainted. When I woke up again, it was already the next day. I stared at the infusion drip for a long time before my body temperature gradually returned to normal. 2 nurses came in to change my dressing. They didn't notice that I was awake and were chatting and laughing. Did you know? The VIP wards upstairs are reserved by that female CEO. I've heard about it a long time ago. The man is a travel blogger. He's quite handsome, but I heard he's divorced. So what? He couldn't help but be fond of him, so he threw a tantrum and live-streamed his suicide. Less than 10 minutes into the broadcast, he only had a small cut on his wrist, and then President Liu rushed over in a hurry. So the video that went viral online was of Ms. Liu? Yes, she rushed to the live broadcast room and hugged the man. The man was handsome, and the woman was beautiful. It was like she was in an idol drama. Then, the nurse lowered her voice and said, according to inside information, Director Liu was pregnant, but because she was too excited to save people, she accidentally miscarried. Now they are both in the hospital to recuperate. In the hospital ward, it was quiet, with only the occasional subtle sounds from instruments. A nurse's exclamation broke the silence. No wonder I saw the director of obstetrics and gynecology went upstairs this morning. Hearing this, my heart suddenly tightened and tears unconsciously overflowed from the corners of my eyes. Stella, who is usually so high and mighty, would go to such lengths for a man. I feel mixed emotions. The relationship that I once thought was indestructible now seems so fragile. At this time, the nurse finally found that I had woken up. She saw my face full of tears and quickly wiped away the tears from the corners of my eyes and gently comforted me. You are lucky this time. And when the doctor was rescuing you, he also removed the tumor in your stomach, and the test results showed that it was benign. Do you want me to help you contact your family? I shook my head slowly, with only one question in my mind. Where is the girl who gave me a blood transfusion yesterday? The nurse replied, she is an intern in our hospital. Yesterday, in order to save you, she, a girl, drew 800 milliliters of blood. I guess she has to lie down and rest at home these days. Another nurse echoed, I've never seen anyone who tried so hard to save others. You're such a fool. When you're discharged from the hospital, I'll definitely give her a banner. It was 9 days later that I was discharged from the hospital. During these few days in the hospital, in order to avoid meeting Stella, I stayed in the ward almost all the time and didn't dare to take a step. Every time I thought of her, my heart felt like being stabbed by a needle. Finally, the day of discharge arrived. As soon as I heard my name being called, I immediately rushed to the front desk to pay. In the corridor, Stella was waiting for the elevator with Richard. Stella heard my name. She was stunned and asked in confusion, "Why do I seem to hear David's name?" Richard patted her shoulder and comforted her. "How could that be? This is a hospital and David is in school. How could he be hospitalized?" Stella thought about it and walked into the elevator. Just as the elevator door closed, I paid the fee and walked out with a bag of medicine. Seeing the elevator just went up, I really didn't want to wait any longer, so I turned around and went to the stairs. The lawyer was already waiting for me downstairs, holding the newly issued divorce certificate in his hand. I took the copy that belonged to me expressionlessly, then transferred several dozen yuan to the lawyer via WeChat for the express fee, and said calmly, "Please help me express the remaining copy to her." Now that I have received the divorce certificate, Stella and I are finally no longer related. I just feel relieved, as if a big stone has been lifted off my shoulders. The African A team was delayed for 3 days due to flight reasons. I was discharged from the hospital and was able to catch up. The team leader originally approved me to recover in China before going, but how could I agree? I am young and recover quickly. I can't hold the team back. On the day of departure, my companions took special care of me. They helped me carry all my luggage and paid for me to board the plane early. The tour leader handed me a local phone card and said, "We'll use this number to contact each other after the plane lands." He was about to remind me that I could keep both cards, but I had already thrown the original phone card into the trash can. The team leader said in surprise, "Child, don't you contact your relatives and friends in China?" I shook my head, turned around and took a deep look at the Beijing city outside the floor-to-ceiling window, and silently said in my heart, "Stella, we will never see each other again in this life." On the other side, on the way home from the hospital, Stella almost crashed into the green belt while driving. Richard asked worriedly, "Ruyan, why have you been so absent-minded these past 2 days? You promised to accompany me to the movies, but you forgot." Stella tapped the steering wheel with her knuckles in annoyance and said, "I'm a little tired today. Ask Lejia to accompany you." These days, she felt more and more uneasy. David, unusually, hadn't sent her a single message for so many days. She didn't dare tell me about her pregnancy because she didn't know who the father of the child was, and she naturally didn't tell me about the miscarriage. After returning home, Stella stood at the door, hesitating whether to take the initiative to call me. She was in a complicated mood. On the one hand, she was worried about the distance between us, but on the other hand, she was unwilling to give up. At this time, Richard pestered her to learn to write calligraphy. Stella said helplessly, "David has a brush. I will go to his study to look for it." She pushed open the door of the study, which was supposed to be a place I often used. However, when she walked in, she was shocked by the empty room in front of her. "It seems that there were a lot of books here before. Maybe they were moved to school?" Stella thought to herself. As she searched, she felt more and more wrong. Bookcases, drawers, wardrobes, all empty. At this time, doubts in her heart slowly rose. Stella's heart began to beat wildly, and a cold premonition quickly surged into her heart. She hurried back to the bedroom and opened the bedside table. I once made a photo album for her. That photo album was our common memories. She would look through it every night, as if those days were precious times she could not forget. However, when she opened the bedside table with hope, she only found a divorce agreement inside, and her signature was clearly on the document. How could this happen? Stella stared at the document in shock and checked it over and over again, but still couldn't believe what she saw. Suddenly, she remembered that a month ago, she had signed a safety responsibility letter for me without knowing it. It turned out that I was ready for a divorce at that time, but she had never noticed it. At this moment, anger surged into her heart like a tide, and what surged in her heart was not only the anger of being betrayed, but also the humiliation of being deceived. Although she was forced to marry me, at this moment, the intolerable feeling still made her extremely indignant. She slumped on the edge of the bed, her eyes empty, and her mind kept replaying the moments we had spent together. The past 4 years seemed calm, but behind them were my deep dependence on and misunderstanding of her. I once thought that she was my future, and we had envisioned a beautiful life together. When I graduated, we would have children and form a complete family. But now, All those promises and aspirations have become a bubble, like a distant dream, untouchable. Now, the divorce agreement in front of Stella is like a loud slap in the face, slapping her hard, with an unbearable stinging feeling. She opened the WeChat chat box with me angrily and confusedly and asked, "What do you mean?" However, the only response she got was the glaring blacklisted sign. She didn't give up and called my number again. She tried 3 times in a row, but got the prompt tone that the call could not be connected. She was angry and crumpled the agreement into a ball and threw it aside. The complex emotions in her heart intertwined into a frenzy, rolling in her mind. She still felt that she was just a student who had just graduated, and the coldness and alienation I showed seemed more like I was jealous of Richard. So she decided to ask me out again on the weekend to explain everything clearly. She recalled the last time we had dinner. She wanted to tell me about her pregnancy and planned to live a good life with me. However, Richard lost control of his emotions after learning the news. He cried and said to her, "Ruyan, we drank and slept in the same room for a night. The child in your belly may also be mine. If you reconcile with David like this, don't want to live anymore." The situation was urgent at the time. She didn't have time to explain too much to me, and the things in her heart were suppressed silently. She thought that as long as I knew the truth, everything would be over, and she would be forgiven by me. After all, she always carried the photo album I made for her with her. It was an emotional sustenance in her heart. She firmly believed that she still had feelings for me, and a divorce agreement could not change anything. We are still husband and wife-in-law. At worst, she promised to keep a distance from Richard in the future. Just as she was immersed in these thoughts, Richard walked in and handed her a file bag. "Ruyan, a courier just came. I signed for it for you." Stella was upset at this time. She took the file bag and threw it on the table. However, she suddenly thought that it might be my stuff, so she stood up and tore open the document bag. With a click, the dark red booklet fell to the ground, with the words "Divorce Certificate" printed on it. Stella was like crazy, checking the name and stamp on the document over and over again. She couldn't believe that all this was true. Her cold eyes made Richard stunned for a moment. Stella, who was always elegant and calm, was shocked by her expression at this moment. This unprecedented helplessness and confusion was something Richard had never seen before. "Ruyan, this may be my prank. You are too pampering me," Richard said, trying to hold her arm. Students like David who have never experienced setbacks just like to act up. Just leave him alone. "Can you accompany me to buy brushes this afternoon?" Before he finished speaking, Stella suddenly looked at him coldly, pushed him away and said, "Sorry, I have a husband. If you are lonely and bored, you can find someone else to accompany you." After saying that, Stella rushed out the door with the car keys without even putting on her coat. Richard looked at Stella's receding back in confusion. She had never rejected his request so bluntly. Why? Richard's handsome eyebrows stood up sarcastically, and he was full of resentment. Stella and I were obviously forced to marry each other by her parents, so she should be happy about the divorce. Stella drove to the gate of Jingsheng University. She suddenly realized how confused she was. She had been married to me for 4 years, and she only knew that I was studying at this school, but she didn't even know what major I was in or what class I was in. She smiled bitterly, knowing that she was an incompetent wife. In desperation, she called Professor Liu and asked, "Dad, do you know how to find David at school? What's wrong? Did you have a fight with David?" No wonder he seemed worried the last time he came to see me alone. Professor Liu's words shocked Stella. It turned out that I had gone to see my elders during this period. Maybe I felt wronged but had no one to vent. Thinking of my helpless look, Stella felt sad. "No, I just wanted to give him a surprise and pick him up for dinner." Stella didn't mention the divorce certificate. After all, she knew I loved her so much. She once casually said that the southern accent sounded unsophisticated, so I practiced speaking in a standard Beijing accent. This time, she just thought that I was a little angry because of Richard's appearance. When she finds me, all misunderstandings will disappear, and we will naturally be back to normal. Stella rehearsed in her mind what she was going to say when we met. But when she arrived at the dormitory building number provided by Professor Liu, she found that the entire floor was empty. "All the students here have graduated and moved away. You are his family, don't you know?" The dormitory manager looked at Stella suspiciously and kicked her out in a few words. She was at a loss, and whenever she met someone downstairs, she would grab him and ask, "Hello, do you know David?" But most people kept their distance from her because of her distracted look. When it was getting dark, a boy finally answered her question without thinking she was crazy. "Who are you to David?" "I'm his sister." Stella didn't tell the truth. She didn't know how to explain her identity to others. We chose to keep our marriage secret to prevent me from encountering unnecessary troubles in school because of this marriage. But Stella never expected that when she asked about it as my sister. The boy immediately opened up in indignation. As his sister, why did you come to see him just now? He had a car accident a few days ago and had a tumor surgery. Don't you know? The boy's voice was full of blame. Tumor? Hearing these two words, Stella's body froze instantly, as if she was cast under a spell and couldn't move. It seems he met an irresponsible scumbag. Not only did she ignore David when he was sick, but she also didn't even come to see him once when he had a car accident and was bleeding internally on the main road. The boy became more and more excited as he spoke, accusing her emotionally. Every word he said was like a sharp knife, stabbing straight into Stella's heart, and like a heavy slap, hitting her face again and again. Stella's mind quickly flashed back to the scene of meeting me in the hospital. I was pale and obviously in a bad state, but what was she doing? She was happily doing a prenatal checkup for her baby with Richard. That day, I fell to the ground in pain on the road, dying, but she didn't even give me a concerned look and hurried to stop Richard from committing suicide. I had been in a car accident and had stomach cancer, but she knew nothing about it. Stella's heart seemed to be tightly grasped by an invisible big hand, twisted into a ball. She wished she could go back to the past and slap herself twice. Classmate, do you know where David is in the hospital? I want to go see him. Stella spoke with the last glimmer of hope, her voice full of anxiety and regret. She swore to herself that as long as I forgave her, she would take good care of me and would never leave me to go find Richard again. However, the male student shook his head with a look of regret. You came too late. He has been discharged from the hospital a long time ago. He participated in the African Aid Project and should have arrived in Africa by now. What did you say? The last string in Stella's heart snapped completely. Her world collapsed in an instant, and she fell into endless darkness and despair. But Stella did not give up. She worked like a madman, mobilizing all her connections and asking around, and finally found the person in charge of the school's Aid to Africa project. She completely ignored the assistant's objection and paid a visit in the middle of the night. I want to do charity and donate $3 million to your medical team. No, $10 million. Stella's eyes were red, like a wounded beast, and her only request at this moment was, take me to where the medical team is now. Until this moment, she was shocked to realize how important I was to her. She didn't even dare to imagine how she would spend the rest of her life if she could never see me again. Stella's financial offensive soon paid off. After the advance payment was made, the project manager quickly arranged a tour guide and flight for her. The leader told her that I was stationed in a small town in Guinea, Africa. To get there, not only do you need to take a 20-hour flight, but you also have to sit on a local bus for several hours after getting off the plane. The entire journey takes nearly a day and a night. During this long journey, Stella hardly slept a wink. She had only one thought in her mind, which was to see me as soon as possible, say sorry to me in person, and then take me home. As soon as Stella arrived at the medical team's base, she asked hurriedly without even having time to put down her luggage, "Where's David? Where's David?" An old doctor received her and said slowly, "We were notified too late. David had already left early in the morning to provide free medical treatment to the tribes in the nearby villages." As soon as the old doctor finished speaking, a young man ran in breathlessly, shouting, "Team Leader Zhang, something terrible has happened. The bridge and road have collapsed, and our free clinic car has been buried in the rubble. Several doctors are now missing." "What did you say?" Stella grabbed the man's shoulder and asked in a trembling voice, "Is David in the car?" The man was frightened by Stella's hysterical look and stammered, "Dr. Liu? He's here." Hearing this affirmative answer, Stella's body swayed and she almost lost her balance. She used all her strength to control her trembling voice, and after getting the direction, she immediately rushed out the door regardless of everything. On the way here, the tour guide told Stella that these months are the rainy season in Africa and natural disasters occur frequently. He also advised her to come back later. But how could Stella listen? After she found out where I was going, she didn't want to wait even a second longer. In the past, she was too slow to notice my passionate love, which broke my heart. I even hid something as serious as stomach cancer from her. She had sworn countless times in her heart that she would compensate me 1,000 times after finding me. However, reality was so cruel that as soon as she arrived here, she heard the tragic news that I had died. Stella arrived at the collapsed road. It was already getting dark. Rescue workers wearing mining lamps were anxiously moving back and forth among the ruins. Stella didn't understand the local language, so she could only silently follow the rescuers and dig through the rubble together. She had no tools, so she could only use her own hands to dig out the bricks and soil. The rough gravel soon cut her hands, bleeding profusely, and her hands were covered with scars. But Stella seemed to feel no pain, and her hands moved faster and faster. She was extremely anxious when she thought that I might be buried under the rubble, and my life or death was uncertain, as if speeding up would increase my chances of survival. The sky was getting darker and darker, and Stella's hands were already bloody, but she was unaware of it. The passage of time and the physical pain no longer mattered to her. It was like a movie playing in her mind, constantly replaying my face, and those scenes of us being together now flooded into her mind like a tide. She regretted. She blamed herself. She wished this was just a nightmare. It turned out that over the past 4 years, I had unknowingly engraved every expression and every movement of mine deeply in her heart. Those moments that she had once ignored now flooded into her mind like a tide, and she was shocked to realize that I had already quietly occupied her heart. But she understood everything too late, and she pushed the person she loved most away with her own hands. Stella was immersed in sorrow and didn't notice that several medical staff in white coats passed by her, one of whom was me, the one she had been thinking about. Dr. Liu, there seems to be a Chinese person over there who has been helping with the digging with his bare hands. I seem to hear her calling your name when I passed by just now. Is she someone you know? My teammate's words caught my attention, and I looked in the direction of the flashlight. The light source was too dim, and I could only see a blurry figure. Although the tall and thin figure immediately reminded me of Stella, I still shook my head at the team member who had just spoken and said firmly, "No, I don't know anyone here." Then, I sighed again and said, "Look at this man's dazed look. He must have lost his loved ones in this disaster. What a pitiful man." After saying that, I immediately went into the makeshift rescue tent and devoted myself to the treatment of the wounded rescued from the rubble. It was a thrilling experience. I was almost buried under the rubble today. The free clinic car of our medical team was supposed to pass this road on the way back. But on the way, we received a call from the old captain, who said that the medical team had received a considerable donation and the donor would come to the base for inspection. The importance of donations to the medical team is self-evident. Everyone in the team attaches great importance to it. After receiving the call, they thought of taking a shortcut back to the base, thus avoiding the landslide on the road. But this time the disaster area was too large and the casualties were too great. So we had no time to take care of the affairs of the base and rushed over to participate in the rescue. The local medical conditions were poor and there was a serious shortage of staff. Faced with such a large-scale unexpected disaster, we were extremely busy and worked for several hours until dawn when we were able to take a break. Stella, who was almost exhausted behind the ruins, heard the voice. Her bloodshot eyes opened immediately, as if she had found a ray of light in the darkness. She looked in the direction of the voice, and the face that had appeared in her mind countless times overnight suddenly appeared before her eyes. "David!" Her call made my heart beat faster. I thought I was hallucinating because I was too tired, so I raised my hands to rub my temples. The next second, I was caught off guard and she hugged me tightly. The strong smell of earth made me frown. "David, I'm so glad you're okay." Stella's body and voice were trembling, and her emotions were surging like a flood. Hearing this familiar voice, I shuddered, as if I was pulled back to those desperate days without a response. "Let me go." I tried to push Stella away, but she held me too tightly. The struggle alarmed my teammate Xi and Xing behind me, who came forward and pushed Stella away, protecting me behind him. "Are you okay?" Xi and Xing comforted me while looking at Stella warily and asked, "Are you here to cause trouble? This place is too backward, and some local people would rather believe in unfounded myths than trust doctors, so medical disputes occur frequently. In this kind of rescue operation, the doctors are protected by armed forces, and the guards not far away have noticed the quarrel here." I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I quickly stood between Xi and Xing and Stella and explained, "I know her." Seeing me standing up to help her, Stella felt warmed in her heart and quickly went to hold my hand. Glancing at her hands covered in dirt, she paused, wiped them off her body, and then reached out to pinch the corner of my clothes. But I pushed her hand away with a cold face and said coldly, "Stella, let's talk about it over there." In the simple medical tent, Stella looked at me, feeling both familiar and strange. My appearance had not changed at all, but the way I looked at her was so cold and distant, as if there was an insurmountable gap between us. "David, I'm sorry." She had 1,000 words in her heart, but in the end, she said this belated apology. "David, I know everything you've been through. I know about your stomach cancer." "That's enough." I interrupted her story with a teasing smile on my face, Stella flew all the way from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere just to laugh at my former love-brainness. My words stabbed into Stella's heart like a knife, and she hurriedly explained, "No, I just feel very sorry for you before, and I know I was wrong. David, please don't divorce me, okay?" After a long silence, I sneered, "Stella is too arrogant. Do you think that if you just say sorry, I will wag my tail at you like a puppy?" Every word was heartless, and Stella's heart was bleeding. But she knew that the harm she had brought to me was 100 times more severe than this. She looked at me, her eyes bloodshot from not closing for 30 hours, and she flattered me in a fawning way. "David, I was wrong before. Come back with me. There are accidents of infectious diseases here every day. Do you know how worried I was about you last night? If you come back with me, even if you don't remarry me, I will support you in completing the career you want." But I still had a cold expression on my face and said slowly, "Stella, you haven't changed at all. You still don't understand me at all, and you are still so self-righteous." I looked at the woman in front of me whom I had loved for several years, and finally I felt truly let go at this moment. Once upon a time, I thought that love meant giving without reservation. Even if she ignored me again and again, even if she had someone else in her heart, I chose to endure it silently. I thought that as long as I loved her enough, she would see my good side one day. But reality shattered my fantasy again and again. I lost myself in this relationship and became humble and pitiful. It was not until I left her and came to this faraway Africa that I rediscovered my own value and dignity in the process of helping others. I am no longer the person who only revolves around her. I have my own career and a group of like-minded friends. I started working hard for my dream. "Stella, we can't go back," I said lightly, without a trace of emotion in my tone. "Let the past be the past. I hope you can live a good life in the future." Stella was stunned. She seemed not to have accepted this reality yet. Her tears kept flowing down. "David, I really know I was wrong. Can't you give me another chance?" I looked at her, without a trace of hesitation in my heart. "I have given you opportunities many times, but you didn't cherish them. Now, I have let it go, and I hope you can let it go too." After saying that, I turned and walked out of the tent, leaving Stella alone crying inside. Walking out of the tent, the sun shone on my face. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm sun. The pain and sadness of the past have become a thing of the past. Stella, you never love anyone. The person you love most is yourself. I left, you feel uncomfortable, so you think about how to tie me back. I stared straight at Stella. My eyes swept across the dirt on her hands. My tone was full of disappointment and determination. "You are looking for me like crazy. That is not love. It is just yourself touching." At this moment, the rescue team shouted urgently outside the tent, "Doctor, we rescued another injured person. His thigh was seriously injured, and he needs surgery urgently." I didn't care about the confrontation with Stella for a moment. I responded loudly while quickly opening the tent curtain and rushing out, "I'll do it. I'm a surgeon." But after jogging a few steps, the strength in his feet suddenly weakened. His vision went dark, and his body seemed to have suddenly lost all its strength and was on the verge of collapse. "David! Dr. Liu!" Two voices sounded almost at the same time. Xian Xing, who was not far away, supported me before Stella could. "Dr. Liu, are you okay?" "It's okay. It's probably low blood sugar. I'll be fine after a while." I responded with an unstable breath, and I felt my eyes go dark. "You are weak and need to rest. You can't endure it any longer." As he said that, Xian Xing supported my waist and walked into the tent. Stella stared at Xian Xing's hand. She took a step forward and said eagerly, "Let me do it. I'm his wife." "No." Upon hearing that, I grabbed Xian Xing's sleeve tightly, fearing that I would be handed over to Stella. "We are divorced, and I don't want to see her." My cold eyes broke Stella's heart, but she still followed me into the tent without giving up. The rescuers outside were still anxiously asking for help. "Where is the surgeon in the team?" I was arranged to lie on the blanket and struggled to get up. "I am recovered and can go on the operating table now." Xian Xing forced me to lie down. She had a pretty face, but her voice was firm and unquestionable. "You forgot. I am also a surgeon. You take a rest. Let me go." Thinking that she was a famous medical genius in the department a few years ago, I felt relieved. "Then I'll leave it to you first. I'll help you when I recover." Stella behind me silently clenched her palms. She was now only the ex-wife in name only, and she didn't even have the right to be jealous. "I'm going to save people. You feed David something," Xian Xing told Stella with a look of disgust before leaving the tent. There was no other way. The staff was too short, Even the driver was temporarily pulled to transport the wounded. Stella, the proud daughter of heaven, ever been yelled at like this? But when she was asked to take care of me, she instantly lost her temper. Supplies were limited, so she made a simple cup of hot chocolate with Snickers and milk and whispered, "Drink some. This can quickly restore your blood sugar and help warm your body." I was not used to Stella's gentleness. I raised my hand to take the cup. "I'll drink it myself. I'll hold the cup for you. You can just drink with the straw." Stella carefully handed the straw to my mouth. "Afraid that I would refuse," she added, thinking of my anxious look just now. "Save your energy now so that you can save more people later." Hearing this, I finally stopped refusing. In fact, Stella hadn't eaten for nearly a day and a night, and after a night of intense digging with bare hands, she was already on the verge of collapsing. But she held the cup with a firm hand, not moving, for fear of choking me. Looking at her injured fingers and blood stains, I was touched. In 4 years of marriage, she had never treated me like this. I didn't expect that now that we're divorced, she would become so gentle again. It's a pity that I had already made up my mind to give up on her, and now we are just strangers. After drinking a cup of hot chocolate and regaining my strength, I immediately got up to help Xi and Xing with the operation. "You should have a good rest." Stella reached out to stop me, but I had already stood up. When I touched her hand, I frowned slightly. "Why are you so hot?" Stella was about to speak when an anxious cry came from outside the tent. "Dr. Liu, there is another new wounded." I immediately shook off Stella's hand and rushed out of the tent regardless of my own safety. My white coat fluttered in the wind as I ran. Stella looked at my busy figure at the rescue site, my fluttering white coat, my firm steps, and my focus and calmness when facing the patients. Suddenly, she deeply understood what I meant when I said that she never understood me. This was the first time she had seen me being so wanton, young, wise, and brave. In the past 4 years of marriage, she always seemed to have her eyes elsewhere, ignoring the most real and dazzling side of the person who loved her so much. The rescue work at the accident site was finally over, and the medical team returned to the base exhausted. As soon as I got off the car, I couldn't wait to get into the dormitory, just wanting to have a good sleep and sleep away all the fatigue of the past few days. But as soon as I lay down, the old captain woke me up in a hurry. "Where's Stella?" I was still a little confused and didn't react for a while. "Stella." The old captain was so anxious that he beat his chest and stamped his feet. I finally came to my senses and listened to the captain's lengthy description. It turned out that Stella had been yelling about coming to find me as soon as she landed, and she hasn't come back yet. She's a girl, in an unfamiliar place, and she didn't bring a translator. After I understood it, I realized that Stella was the kind-hearted entrepreneur who donated 10 million to our medical team in Africa. The team attaches great importance to this donation. After all, this 10 million can buy a lot of equipment and medicines that were never imagined before, which is crucial to the development of the medical team. I thought for a moment and decided to take the initiative to find Stella. I couldn't let the donation go wrong because of my personal reasons. "I'll go with you, and we'll take turns driving." Xi and Xing volunteered. I thought Xi and Xing was more proficient in the local language than I was, so I didn't refuse. On the way, I was afraid that Xi and Xing would get sleepy while driving, so I took the initiative to chat with her and unknowingly brought up what happened in China. "Xi and Xing, I was in the hospital with severe bleeding at that time. Why did you donate so much blood for me?" At that time, I had severe internal bleeding and almost lost my life, and it was Xi and Xing who donated my blood. We were originally just acquaintances from the same department. Xi and Xing was a loner, and we had hardly spoken to each other in the several years we were classmates. I didn't expect that within just 1 month, she not only saved my life, but also went to Africa with me. Isn't it the doctor's mission to save the dying and the wounded? Xi and Xing answered me in an official manner, then tilted her head to look at me. However, I had already fallen asleep leaning back in the chair. Xi and Xing raised her lips slightly and whispered to herself, "Of course it's because I like you." I was so tired that I fell asleep in a second, so I didn't hear it. When we returned to the scene of the accident, there were no trapped people, and the only people left were workers cleaning up the collapsed building. Xi and Xing and I searched for a long time, and with the help of the locals, we learned that a Chinese woman who had fainted was sent to the local embassy. Fainted? I remembered that when I saw Stella for the last time. Her hands were terribly hot. Nothing must happen to her. Thinking about the huge donation, I rushed to the embassy in a hurry. Xi and Xing, who was standing by, saw my anxious look and thought that I was just concerned about Stella's safety, and a look of loss instantly filled her eyes. Finally, we arrived at the embassy before dark and saw Stella, who was sweating from the fever. Finally, someone came to pick her up. The embassy staff breathed a sigh of relief. She had such a high fever, but she refused to take medicine. We almost forced her to give her an injection. After the staff member confirmed my passport, he immediately stared at me in surprise and said, "So you are David. This lady kept calling your name when she was unconscious. Great. You must be the person she loves most in the world." The staff handed Stella to me with confidence. Looking at the disheveled Stella on the bench, I just felt a headache. I don't think of myself as her lover. After returning to the base, I gave Stella some antipyretics and her condition gradually improved. While I was giving her an 4-drip, she weakly opened her eyes and held my wrist. I was so helpless and wanted to ask other people to take care of her, but she refused to drink the medicine given by others. The old captain had no choice but to let me sacrifice myself to achieve the donation of 10 million. I gritted my teeth and pried her fingers apart, but luckily she was very weak and no match for me. I wrapped her tightly with the bedsheet so that she couldn't move. Stella protested immediately and turned her head away from taking the medicine. "Mr. Liu, you are going to cheat on me even if you take medicine?" I had no choice but to throw the medicine aside. Take it or not, she won't die anyway because she's on an 4. Unexpectedly, when I stopped feeding her, Stella became anxious. After making sure that I would not feed her at all, she supported herself with her arms and drank half a bowl of instant powder. She cooperated well with the treatment in the following days, so she recovered quickly. The old captain finally organized a simple charity donation ceremony, and Stella finally signed the contract to make the donation at the ceremony. With this money, our medical team can add several projects and equipment in the local area. The old captain was so excited that he burst into tears and asked each team member to shake hands with Stella in turn to express his gratitude. It was my turn. I extended my right hand to Stella politely, just like the other players. She stared at me with her burning eyes for 2 seconds. There seemed to be a lot of complicated emotions hidden in her eyes, but she couldn't tell them clearly at the moment. Finally, she sighed softly. Her voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible, and then she just shook my hand with her fingertips. At that moment, I knew in my heart that the me who used to be filled with her had long disappeared. Although the conditions on the medical team side were very difficult, facing a donor like Stella who donated 10 million yuan at one go, the team still arranged a special thank you banquet. This is also human nature. At the dinner table, Stella's performance was so surprising. I don't know what she was thinking or what went wrong with her. She accepted every toast from everyone and poured one cup after another into her mouth. I couldn't help but frowning when I saw her like that. You know, she used to hate the drinking culture. Back then, she was young and promising. When the company was first established, she stood out in the industry with her own abilities and means and became a dark horse. At that time, she was never forced to drink at various dinner parties. I have been married to her for 4 years, and except for the day when Richard got married, I have never seen her indulge in drinking like she did now. By the end of the thank you dinner, Stella was already extremely drunk and collapsed into a puddle of mud, and the task of sending her back to the hotel fell on me, unsurprisingly. Why? Because she was very naughty after getting drunk, and she wouldn't let anyone touch her except me. As I supported her, I was wondering, Stella, did you do this on purpose? I supported her as she walked, and suddenly something changed my mind. So I didn't take her to the hotel we had booked. I turned around and walked towards the nearby slum area. After a while, he helped her stand at the door of a small hotel. Stella had a hot body and a pretty face. Even if she was drunk, the noble temperament she exuded could not be hidden. Along the way, I don't know how many people's attention I attracted. The hotel owner came here from China to do business. When she saw us coming, she immediately came to greet us with a smile on her face. I asked how much it cost per night, and the lady boss stretched out a few fingers to calculate and told me that it was less than 100 renminbi. I waved my hand and said it was open for one night. The boss lady probably misunderstood our relationship. She looked at Stella's pretty appearance, then looked at me with a teasing smile on her face, as if she was saying that I was very lucky. Stella upstairs under the gossipy gaze of the landlady. As soon as I entered the room and lifted the bed sheet of the small hotel, a strong, musty smell hit me. I pinched my nose and threw Stella on the bed. Her pretty eyebrows immediately frowned, probably because this environment made her very uncomfortable. I couldn't help laughing when I saw her like this. I thought, when has Stella, a born young lady, ever lived in such a dirty, messy, and shabby room? You can't blame me for this. She's been sticking to me like this lately, and whenever she's sick or drunk, she forces me to take care of her. I came to Africa to help, not to change my country to serve her. This time, I must make her suffer a little, learn a lesson, and not dare to bother me in Africa again. Stella, wearing a high-end dress, lying on the stinky quilt. I was so satisfied that I clapped my hands and planned to leave. But I didn't expect that as soon as I turned around, she grabbed my wrist tightly. David, don't go. Don't leave me. I turned around and met her burning gaze. Her drunken eyes were half open, and the whites of her eyes were bloodshot. Under the dim, incandescent bulb, I even seemed to see a few tears in her eyes. I asked myself, if such a noble Stella looked so pitiful, if it were another man, his heart would have melted long ago. But unfortunately, my heart had died long before I left the country. No matter how much pain there was in her eyes, it was not even 1/10 of what I had experienced. That day, I was forgotten on the road alone, and I felt my blood draining out drop by drop. I will never forget that kind of pain in my life. I know very well that Stella is clinging to me now, but it is just a momentary guilt. We have been married for 4 years. If she really loves me, how could she have done those things after Richard returned to the country? I lowered my eyes and tried to pull my wrist back from her grasp. But she was drunk, and I didn't know where she got so much strength from. She held me tighter than a frightened crab, holding me tightly, as if she was afraid that I would disappear if I pulled away. Stella, let go. My wrists turned white from being squeezed by her. I looked at the kettle on the bedside, wondering whether I should just knock her out. At this moment, Xian Xing's voice suddenly appeared behind me. Dr. Liu. With Xian Xing's help, I was finally able to get away. I'm sorry, Dr. Liu, this place is not safe. I followed you because I was afraid something might happen to you. Xian Xing explained to me carefully. It's okay. Now everyone is settled. Let's go. I glanced at Stella and turned to leave. But Stella's pleading voice came again. David, I feel bad. Can you please stay? Stella, please respect yourself. You have nothing to do with Dr. Liu now. Xian Xing immediately blocked me behind him. Although she is a few years younger than me, the maturity in her eyes is no less than that of Stella. Xian Xing looked down at Stella lying on the bed and said word by word, Stella, if you feel uncomfortable, do you have to have Dr. Liu accompany you? When David was bleeding profusely and on the verge of death, where was your nominal wife? Were you with him? After Xian Xing finished questioning, the small room suddenly fell into silence, so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Only Stella's hand hanging by the bed was trembling slightly. Don't be so self-indulgent, Stella, Xian Xing said, took my hand and walked out of the room. When we got downstairs, Xian Xing softened her tone and asked me, Dr. Liu, you won't blame me for being nosy, will you? I shook my head and thought, sometimes it's true that those who are involved are confused, and those who are not involved can see things more clearly. Maybe Stella will really listen to some words from other people's mouths and give up completely. This night was really too hard for Stella. The headache from the drunkenness, the stench in the air, and the constant pain in her heart. All these uncomfortable feelings intertwined together, making it impossible for her to sleep peacefully all night. But under the influence of alcohol, she was unable to move and could only endure it, suffering in a daze until dawn. Her mind was also in a mess. Thinking back on her life, it had been smooth sailing, and she seemed to have never experienced any setbacks. But this time, she felt as if she had fallen into a dark abyss and couldn't climb out. Stella's youth was once filled with a man named Richard. In college, she plunged into love with Richard, and her heart and eyes were filled with him. But Richard, who yearned for freedom in his heart, resolutely went abroad to pursue the distant place. At that time, Stella felt that the sky had fallen, and she believed that this was the biggest hurdle in her life that she could not cross. In extreme pain and confusion, she drank to drown her sorrows, one cup after another, trying to numb herself with alcohol. But fate loved to play tricks on her, and after getting drunk one time, she had sex with me without knowing what was going on. Afterwards, the two got married under unclear circumstances. Stella believed that she would never fall in love with anyone else except Richard. So, she seemed to have built a thick defense line for her heart and deliberately turned a blind eye to the me beside her. No matter how much I gave, she pretended not to see it. The days passed one by one, until I was completely disappointed and left her without looking back. At that moment, Stella woke up from her dream. She was shocked to realize that the defense she had always been proud of had been unknowingly broken by me. But it was too late. I had already moved on to a wider world, no longer lingered in the small world around her, and would never come back to her side again. Stella spent a painful night in the small hotel. She contacted her assistant and bought a ticket back home. She knew that it was time for her to leave, and there was no point in staying any longer. That I learned about Stella's return. During that time, a village near the base suddenly broke out with dengue fever, and the situation was very critical. Most of the team members were urgently sent there, and they were busy fighting the disease. Fortunately, after some hard work, they finally succeeded in controlling the spread of the disease. When I returned to the base for a meeting, I learned from the old captain that Stella had returned home the day after the thank you banquet. After hearing the news, I felt relieved. It seemed that she finally figured it out. Her previous regrets towards me were just temporary guilt. Because our medical team was quick and effective in controlling dengue fever, domestic media came from far away to write reports for us. As a new representative of the medical team, I was interviewed. During the interview, I showed my excellent side with my professional knowledge and calm attitude. Coupled with that young and handsome face, the interview clip immediately became popular on domestic social media once it was broadcast. People left praises in the comment area, and various different voices continued to ferment on the internet. The hot search for "David is the most handsome doctor" stayed on the hot search list for several days in a row, and its popularity was close to those of the top internet celebrities. However, I was in Africa, exhausted every day, and there was no internet in many places I went to. I had no idea that such a big thing had happened in China, and I didn't participate in the carnival at all. But Stella in China couldn't ignore the news. At first, she watched my interview videos repeatedly, and she was really happy for me when she saw me in high spirits in the videos. But soon, the old man at home called. "Ryan, why didn't you tell me such a big thing as David's aid mission to Africa?" There was some dissatisfaction in the old man's voice. The old man has not been in good health recently, and Stella has not dared to tell him that she and I have divorced. In fact, she herself could not accept this fact in her subconscious. "Dad, David is a filial son. He knows that you don't want him to go so far away, so I didn't tell you." Stella quickly made up a lie and tried to fool him. She felt that this lie was pretty good. Unexpectedly, the old man got even angrier after hearing this. "Ryan, you don't understand. David has been my favorite student for so many years. How could he not understand me? He wants to go to Africa to help. How could I stop him?" The old man said excitedly, his voice still loud and powerful. Okay, I'll apologize to you on behalf of David." Stella responded helplessly. She smiled bitterly in her heart, because among all the people around me, she was the only one who couldn't understand my pursuit. But the old man still refused to give in and insisted that she give him my number. "Dad, David is very busy over there. Please don't bother him every other day." Stella said this, but she felt bitter in her heart. She could actually find my contact information from the information provided by the African aid team, but she didn't even have the courage to call. She was afraid to hear my heartless voice. In the pursuit and waiting of love, she realized belatedly that she had lost the right to happiness and had lost completely. At the same time, Richard also saw the news about me on the internet. Since Stella went to Africa, she almost ignored him. Richard was filled with resentment. These days, I was a hot topic on the internet. Stella actually watched all the videos about me and liked every one of them. Richard finally couldn't sit still anymore and found an opportunity to ask her to have lunch together downstairs in the company. "Ryan, come with me to the hospital after dinner." Stella on the opposite side looked up absent-mindedly. "Are you sick?" "My throat has been sore for some time. Have you forgotten?" Richard said somewhat indignantly. Stella then realized that she was a little distracted. She raised her eyebrows lightly. "Don't be so loud. This is downstairs of my company. If someone hears you, they will misunderstand our relationship." "Okay, I'll pay attention." Under the table, Richard was so angry that he almost broke his nails. He frequently asked Stella to have dinner downstairs at the company, just to create some favorable public opinion, but he didn't expect that news about me was all over the internet recently, and the gossip about him, a small internet celebrity, could not cause any waves at all. And Stella inexplicably began to distance himself from him, and Richard's sense of crisis became increasingly stronger. Looking back at his 20s, he was ignorant of the immensity of the world. Faced with a nearly perfect suitor like Stella, he was too arrogant to take her seriously at all. But after just 4 years, the love he thought was indestructible gradually became dull. In addition, Stella's company was getting better and better, and his ex-wife only wanted to make money by relying on his popularity. He was so angry that he divorced her and returned to China. He informed Stella immediately, and thought that Stella would still treat him as everything as before. When he found out that Stella was married, he was indeed a little flustered, but then he realized that his position in Stella's heart did not seem to have changed, and I was just a housewarming tool in her heart. Richard's mind began to become active, and he even naively thought that Stella would help him give birth to a child without any regrets. But since I left, everything has been spiraling out of control. He couldn't figure it out. Wasn't it a relief for them to get divorced? Ruyan, I know you must be a little angry that David ran away so far away, but he is so much younger than you after all. He must not be willing to stay by your side forever. Richard said softly. For some reason, Stella looked at Richard's bangs and suddenly felt disgusted. She remembered that she had said something mean to me because she cared about Richard's hairstyle. I know I'm not good enough for David, she replied angrily. That's not what I meant. Richard quickly handed her the hospital records. Ruyan, please accompany me to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor said that my throat needs to be taken care of because I talk too much. He thought to himself that maybe this would regain Stella's attention. Unexpectedly, Stella stood up and wanted to draw a line between them. I'm sorry, I don't think our relationship has reached the point where I have to accompany you for a physical examination every time. Ruyan. Richard hurriedly held her back. His eyes filled with tears and his voice choked with sobs. Are you really going to take your anger out on me because of David? In the past, whenever Richard looked so pitiful, Stella's heart would soften. But this time, for the first time, she did not compromise because of his tears. She decisively pulled her wrist away and said sullenly, No, but if you continue to ignore the boundaries between us, I might really get angry with you. I will pay for this meal. If it is really inconvenient, I can help you contact a reliable local medical attendant in Beijing. After saying that, she left without looking back. Stella made irreparable mistakes because she couldn't figure out her own heart. Now, she has come to her senses and doesn't want to make the same mistake again. Thinking back to 4 years ago, when she got drunk for Richard's wedding, she might have really liked him at that time. Richard divorced and returned home. She subconsciously thought that she had not let go of this relationship. It was as if she had grabbed a life-saving straw and felt that she could make up for the regrets of the past. However, all of this is nothing but an illusory obsession. Her feelings for Richard had quietly disappeared as early as a night when she and I were intimate. Fortunately, my departure made her realize her own absurdity and prevent her from hurting another woman again. David, I'm trying not to be a person who only loves myself. I'm trying to correct myself. Will you come back to me? She looked at the clouds in the sky, her heart filled with sadness. The internet craze finally spread to Africa. The medical team decided to take advantage of this wave of momentum and attract more sponsors. I thought this was a good idea, so I registered an account and organized a medical science live broadcast with my teammates. During the live broadcast, the harmonious atmosphere in the team, coupled with the unique, personal charm of the doctors aiding Africa, attracted many netizens. For several consecutive nights, the live broadcast room was packed. Once, someone even spent $2 million directly in the live broadcast room. Looking at the name of this gift-giving app, I inexplicably thought of someone, but when I saw that it was a boy and his IP address was not in Beijing, I felt relieved and secretly laughed at myself for being so self-indulgent. After living in Africa for a few months, my cautious personality has changed a lot. When I occasionally think of Stella, it feels like a lifetime ago, and I quickly forget those memories. Because I have the most fans, every time the team starts a live broadcast, the old captain always likes to let me open the show. On this day, I just came online as usual, but the usually warm and lively public screen was filled with vomiting expressions. Mistress, get out of the live broadcast room. Mistresses are not worthy of being doctors. The insults on the screen made me stunned for a moment. I could only smile awkwardly and said, Did you walk into the wrong live broadcast room? But as soon as I opened my mouth, a new round of more violent abuse followed. You bitch, I'm scolding you. You're destroying other people's feelings. How disgusting. Before I could figure out what was going on, Xian Xing came over and decisively turned off the live broadcast. After the broadcast, I spent a long time researching before I figured out what happened. It turned out that someone had released a photo of Stella parking her car at the school gate to pick me up, as well as a surveillance video of me returning to her home. Previous reports on the internet said that I was an orphan from a poor rural area, and the fact that a poor student and the president of a gaming company had something in common naturally sparked a lot of speculation. In addition, some sharp-eyed fans dug out that Stella was the female guest that Richard had secretly posted about. Netizens immediately labeled me as a mistress who wanted to climb up the social ladder and marry a rich woman. I work in a hospital, and I can prove that when Richard was hospitalized some time ago, it was Stella who personally accompanied and cared for him. No wonder Richard wanted to commit suicide on live broadcasts some time ago. It turned out that a mistress intervened in his relationship. The abuse was overwhelming, and Richard's fans immediately jumped out to defend him. I was reading these comments on the other side of the ocean, and I was so angry that I almost bit my lips until they bled. Don't look at them. These people are just following the crowd. None of them tries to understand the truth. They just want to vent their emotions. Xing said, snatching my phone. Seeing that I was shaking with anger, she couldn't help but touch my hair and whispered to comfort me softly. You didn't do anything wrong. Hearing Xing's gentle voice, I couldn't help but have tears in my eyes. Unexpectedly, everyone in the base stood behind Xing and looked at me with concern. Seeing me crying, everyone hurriedly handed me tissues. The old captain walked up to me and said earnestly, David, we are all on your side. We are all willing to come on camera to clarify and testify for you. Yes, Dr. Liu, we have all heard a little about your past. You and Stella had a normal relationship as a couple. How could you be slandered like this? Everyone was indignant. And after working together for so long, don't we already know your character? Looking at everyone's determined eyes, my originally flustered heart gradually calmed down. I have never been without anything, and now there are so many people walking with me. Thank you. Everyone let me rest and not participate in the live broadcast for the time being. But unexpectedly, after everyone went live, the comments were still one-sided. You are in the same boat. Of course you support him. Who would believe that a poor student was married to Stella? Faced with these irrational netizens, one team member couldn't stand it anymore and cursed, You idiots, can't you have the ability to distinguish right from wrong? As a result, the next second, their account was blocked by the platform. I'm sorry, David. It's all my fault for not being able to control myself. The team member blamed himself. It's okay. At this time, I smiled. It's great to have such a group of people who support me unconditionally by my side. I am already very satisfied that you and I are fighting for the same goal together. As for the rumors in the country, they seem insignificant at the moment. I said lightly, it doesn't matter. Anyway, no one here knows me. I originally thought that I could earn some money through live streaming to contribute to the medical cause here, but who could have expected that the sudden public opinion storm would force this plan to be temporarily shelved? In fact, the idea of this live broadcast came to me because of her in my heart, Stella. At the time, I thought that by leveraging her popularity, I might be able to attract more attention and bring a turnaround to the medical work here. But now, I can only put this matter aside for now. My colleagues were relieved to see that I was still optimistic. But Xing frowned and said to me with a worried look on her face, Dr. Liu, those netizens are so aggressive that no matter how we explain, it's useless. I guess there is someone behind this public opinion who is maliciously manipulating it. What do you think? Her words hit my heart like a heavy hammer. In an instant, Stella's name flashed through my mind. If there is anyone in China who could secretly take intimate photos of Rian and me, have the ability to manipulate public opinion, and go to great lengths to discredit me in order to protect another person, I really can't think of anyone else except Stella's admirer. Stella, who was far away in Beijing, was furious at her secretary. Didn't I ask you to ask the PR department to delete the comment? Why are there still so many negative comments and discussions about David? The secretary replied cautiously, Boss Liu, the more we delete, the more netizens get angry. Some even say David is being shameless and is controlling the comments behind the scenes. Stella was so angry that her fists were about to break. She said decisively, Then I will personally come out to dispel the rumors. David and I are the married couple who have obtained a marriage certificate. The secretary hurriedly reminded, Boss Liu, doing this may damage your and Richard's personal image. Stella didn't have time to think about all this. She held her forehead with her hand, her heart full of worry about me. She couldn't imagine how sad I would be when I saw these comments online. Then, she told her secretary, Help me arrange a trip to Guinea in Africa, quickly. Before the secretary could reply, Stella, special assistant, rushed in from outside the door in a panic, forgetting to knock on the door. Boss Liu, we found out. We found out. The person who first released the secretly taken photos and the person who has been secretly manipulating public opinion have been found. Stella took a stack of documents from the special assistant, took a look at it, and angrily slammed the paper on the table. Richard? It's Richard. Stella could never have imagined that one day she would confront Richard on the roof. In the howling wind, Richard, wearing a large sweater, saw Stella coming over and immediately smiled. Ruyan, you finally remembered to ask me out. I put a picnic table on the roof. How about I watch the fireworks with you here today? Stella had a cold face and calmly dodged Richard, who wanted to approach her. She asked, If I didn't come to you, would you continue to hurt David online? Stella's eyes were terribly dark, as if hiding endless anger. Richard's face was full of disbelief, but he still forced himself to calm down. Ruyan, what are you talking about? I don't understand. Take a look for yourself. Stella threw the stack of papers at Richard. All the rumor-mongering IP addresses on them clearly showed that it was Richard. Ruyan, I just posted 2 photos casually, and I didn't expect netizens to make the matter so serious. Even when begging for mercy, Richard's expression still looked righteous, without a trace of real remorse. Stella's heart sank completely when she saw him like this. Since you still refuse to admit your mistake, don't blame me for exposing you online. After saying that, Stella turned around and left. Richard hugged her from behind and said, Ruyan, you can't do this. Internet celebrity is my livelihood. If you help David clarify, I will become the third party who will be criticized by netizens. Richard, do you know how miserable it is to be bullied online? Why did you hurt David in this way? Stella angrily accused. Richard quickly admitted his mistake. Ruyan, I know I was wrong. Please don't expose the truth. Anyway, David is far away in Africa now, and domestic public opinion cannot affect him. But being an internet celebrity is my career, and if you expose me, my career will be ruined. Stella looked at Richard, this strange yet familiar person in front of her, and felt as if she had never really known him. In my memory, he was rational and free-spirited, but the person standing in front of me now was so selfish and vicious. She frowned and said coldly, Your career is a career, but David's career is not a career? Tomorrow I will mobilize all the strength of the company to hold a press conference and personally clarify for David. Stella's eyes were as hard as a rock, and there was no room for negotiation in her words. Seeing that Stella was serious this time, Richard gritted his teeth and rushed to the edge of the rooftop in 2 or 3 steps. Stepped over the railing. Stella, the day you welcomed me back home, you said you would protect me in China, he shouted hoarsely. Stella's steps to leave finally stopped. She had mixed feelings in her heart. On the one hand, she felt distressed and guilty about me, and wanted to clarify the facts for me at all costs. On the other hand, he was trapped by Richard's crazy behavior. Richard thought that his self-torture plan was foolproof, and when he saw Stella stop, he was delighted and was about to rush towards her with a smile on his face, hoping to ask her to be soft-hearted again. But Stella's next words were like an extremely sharp ice knife, piercing his heart and making him feel like he was falling into an icy cave. Stella turned around, her eyes as cold as frost on a cold night. She spoke each word with an endless chill. You shouldn't touch David. Now that you've harmed him, whatever affection we had before is now completely wiped out. These words were spoken with such force that there was no room for maneuver. Stella, are you serious? Richard's eyes widened in disbelief. Tears instantly fell from his eyes. He acted like he was about to jump downstairs and screamed in a crying voice, If you really want to expose me, I will jump down and die. In his heart, Stella has always been kind and soft-hearted. He just couldn't believe that Stella would really not care about his life or death. However, this time he was completely wrong. Stella didn't even turn her head. Her back was resolute, and she only left behind one cold word. I said, Your affairs have nothing to do with me from now on. After that, she strode towards the corridor, and the sound of her footsteps seemed to step on Richard's heart. Richard was instantly panicked. He didn't want to die at all. He just wanted to scare Stella. Seeing that Stella was really leaving, he panicked and tried desperately to catch up with her. But fate seemed to play a cruel joke at this moment. The old and dilapidated iron railing under his feet made a click sound and suddenly broke without bearing his weight. Ah! A terrified scream pierced the night sky, and Richard fell straight down the stairs like a kite with a broken string. At the moment of falling, his heart was full of regret, and tears flowed uncontrollably. He could never have imagined that things would develop to this point. Stella, who had already walked into the corridor, heard Richard's scream and subconsciously wanted to look back. But at this moment, a call came from the nursing home. This call was like a bolt from the blue, making her forget everything around her in an instant, and her heart was filled with shock and grief. The old man is gone. The voice on the other end of the phone was heavy and cold. Stella felt a black screen in front of her eyes and almost lost her balance. When she rushed to the nursing home in a daze, the staff had already invited a mortician to help the old man prepare his final appearance. How could this happen? Stella couldn't believe her eyes. She kept checking Professor Liu's stopped pulse, as if this could turn back time and bring everything back to the way it was before. Although the old man's health has not been good, he sounded very energetic when he called a few days ago. How come he suddenly? I'm sorry, Stella. The head of the nursing home looked guilty and explained carefully. The old man already had heart problems, and he was so angry after seeing the news today. What news? Stella's mind was in a mess, and she couldn't make sense of it. At this time, a white-haired elder slowly spoke. Old Lou has always been thinking about David. Stella then recognized that this old man was Uncle Joe that the old man had mentioned before. Uncle Joe coughed for a while, suppressed his grief, and explained the whole story to Stella. Some time ago, David was interviewed on TV. Old Lou was very happy. He introduced the heroic doctor to everyone in our sanatorium and said that he was his son-in-law. Unexpectedly, a nosy old lady suddenly appeared in the hospital today and said that people on the internet were scolding David as a mistress and that Professor Lou's daughter was having an affair with someone. This made Lao Lu so angry that he wanted to call you right away. My dad was driven away like this? Stella asked blankly, her voice full of confusion and helplessness. Uncle Joe's eyes were filled with tears, and he shook his head at Stella. Old Lou was just angry at first, but when he called you, he saw this picture on the internet. As he said that, Uncle Joe handed the phone to Stella. Stella took the phone and saw a screenshot of a photo sent by Richard by a netizen on the screen. The netizen also wrote that Richard was wearing the Liu family's heirloom ring and was the Liu family's acknowledged son-in-law and cursed David for being a mistress. Stella saw the ring. She heard a loud bang in her head and her whole body froze. Before, she gave the ring to Richard in front of David. At that time, she could never have imagined that this action not only deeply hurt David's heart, but also planted the seeds of his father's death. The ring was a relic of her parents and meant a lot to her. Now, David had been so hurt by all these things that he left her, and her father had also left her forever because of this hateful public opinion storm. I will take the ring back and bury it with Dad. The remorse in Stella's heart was like a surging tide, like a mountain pressing down on her so hard that she couldn't breathe. She was extremely upset and wanted to find Richard to get the ring back immediately. However, when she rushed to the hospital, she was told that Richard had accidentally fallen from a building and was still hanging on in the intensive care unit. The accidents that happened one after another were like heavy hammers that hit Stella so hard that she lost all her strength. She was in a daze as she helped the old man prepare for the funeral, and she looked like a walking corpse. It was 3 days later that the assistant brought her the broken ring. On the day of the funeral, Stella numbly saw off wave after wave of guests. Everyone told her that the past was hard to change and that she must look forward. But those words of comfort were like light feathers that could not wipe away the pain in her heart. How could she do this? Her father's departure, the misunderstandings between her and David, and Richard's series of absurd things, all locked her up like shackles. After seeing off all the guests, Stella leaned quietly against the old man's portrait, and as if she had lost all support, she slowly slid down to the ground. She gently stroked the broken jade ring in her hand. Clearly, every part of the ring was still there, but the broken jade could never be put back together no matter how hard she tried. At this moment, she finally understood what it meant to be spilt water cannot be collected, broken mirror cannot be mended. This pain went deep into her bones. Just as she was immersed in endless grief, she looked up again and saw a dark figure at the door. Stella felt as if her brain was broken and she was hallucinating. But the hallucination became clearer and clearer, and it even spoke to her. David came to Professor Liu's funeral hall to pay his respects to this teacher who had done him so much good. Professor Liu and his wife were closer to David than his own parents. David lost both his parents when he was young, and his relatives in the village all regarded him as a burden and avoided him as much as possible. He relied on his own efforts to get into college in Beijing. It was also here that he met Professor Liu and his wife, who changed the trajectory of his destiny. Stella, Professor Liu's daughter, was stunned the moment she saw David. She then stood up excitedly and reached out to touch David's hand, as if to confirm whether the person in front of her was real or if she was crazy. But David dodged and said in an unusually cold voice, "Stella, I don't want to break up with you in front of Professor Liu's spirit." These words, like a basin of cold water, instantly woke Stella up. She stepped back in a daze, bowed to David, and said politely but distantly, "Thank you, Mr. Liu, for coming all the way to pay your respects to my father." David lit a stick of incense in front of the coffin with red eyes. He recalled that when he first learned about Professor Liu's death 3 days ago, he sat there for a whole night. He and Stella got their marriage certificate. The professor and his wife treated him with great care. Even though he was deeply hurt by Stella later, he still felt that meeting this couple was the luckiest thing in his life, and he had long regarded them as his biological parents. In order to attend the funeral, he bought the earliest flight ticket and took 2 days to get back to Beijing. But he didn't expect to be secretly photographed as soon as he landed at the airport. It turned out that the discussion about him in China had far exceeded his imagination when he was in Africa. In order not to disrupt Professor Lu's funeral, he could only wait until dark and rushed over wearing a mask and a hat. Stella wanted to explain to David, saying that she had already found out that Richard was behind all the troubles, and she also planned to hold a press conference to help him clarify. But David didn't even listen to her finish and interrupted her ruthlessly. "So are you now apologizing for me on behalf of Richard? Are you going to ask me to continue to be a scapegoat and increase the popularity for Richard in the next step?" His eyes were full of disdain and alienation. Stella hurriedly explained that she was ready to hold a press conference to explain everything, but her father passed away suddenly, so the press conference had to be postponed. David responded coldly, "Don't bother. I will solve this problem myself when I come back this time." After 4 years of marriage, David learned a profound lesson. Never pin your hopes on others, only you can pull yourself out of the quagmire. After returning to the hotel from Professor Lu's funeral, David immediately took action. He only asked for a week's leave from the team and raced against time. He took out his computer and began to edit his counter-article. He meticulously listed the marriage certificate, divorce certificate, the timeline of Richard's return to China, his tumor checklist, and all the chat records with Professor Lu and his wife in the past few years. Of course, there was also the key evidence that Xian Xing helped him get. Xian Xing was afraid that he would get into trouble on the road, so she also asked for leave and followed him back to China. Unexpectedly, Xian Xing also knew some hacking skills, and as soon as she returned to China, she helped him find out that the person who first posted those photos was Richard. David has always been good at writing. He compiled all the evidence into a long article. He posted the article on his personal account early in the morning. This article was undoubtedly a bombshell. Less than 3 hours after it was published, the topic quickly became a hot search. Netizens forwarded and commented, "David was wrongly accused, and Richard is the real mistress," all of which quickly became the focus of public attention. At this time, Uncle Joe from the nursing home also shot a short video to publicly support David. In the video, Uncle Joe said fiercely, "David is a kind and good child, and he is the only son-in-law that the old Lu couple have ever recognized. It's a pity that netizens were instigated by bad people and hurt David, which indirectly led to Professor Lu's sudden death." Uncle Joe is not an ordinary person. He is an agricultural giant who has been retired for many years. He has a strong social influence, and his appeal cannot be underestimated. As his video spread, more and more people began to forward David's clarification article, and those who once followed the group to abuse him gradually remained silent and even sent private messages to apologize. At the same time, the comment section of Richard's social media account has been flooded with insults, and netizens have finally seen the truth. It turns out that the man who appears to be free and easy and romantic not only covets other people's wives, but also deliberately frames the wife. This image of a manly bitch and green tea girl completely exposed his disguise. Also on the hot search list was Stella. Netizens dug up all kinds of details and began to dig up her past, and the comments were full of malice towards her. "What a scumbag. She ran to take care of her lover when her husband had a tumor. How disgusting. What kind of conscientious game can a company with such a person develop? This is the first time I've seen a woman who gave the family heirloom ring to her mistress and indirectly killed her own father. She's such a scumbag." As a result, the market value of Stella's game company plummeted, and its stock price plummeted. The company couldn't wait to ask her to respond, but faced with overwhelming abuse, Stella had no idea how to explain. She knows that what she did in the past has already become an indelible mark. In the interview, Stella only responded to 2 things. First, "I am sorry to David." Second, "I am now sure that David is the love of my life, but I realized it too late." When Richard saw what Stella said in the news video, he was so angry that he almost lost control and angrily threw his phone to the ground, smashing it to pieces. Seeing this, the nurse next to him put the food on the small table, turned around and walked out without paying any attention to him. Richard shouted angrily, "Hey, come back. I paid you to come here. Believe it or not, I will fire you." However, no matter how he shouted, the caregiver acted as if he didn't hear him. After all, he is no longer the much-loved internet celebrity, but a disabled person who cannot take care of himself. Although he survived the fall from the 6th floor, his legs could no longer stand. When Richard learned that he would never be able to stand again, he felt deeply desperate and felt that life was worse than death. He wanted to go back to the past, to the videos that recorded Stella. But now, when he opened the comments section, it was full of abuse and bad reviews against him. Why? Richard angrily beat his unconscious legs, tears blurring his vision. Suddenly, a familiar voice sounded at the door of the ward. "Richard, long time no see." He was stunned for a moment, and then he looked in the direction of the sound and saw a tall, blonde, blue-eyed woman standing at the door. Her figure shocked Richard's heart. It was his ex-wife, and gently put down a bouquet of yellow roses, stood quietly for a while, and finally spoke. "This bouquet of flowers is for our past." Her words were short and powerful, with a sense of endless regret and farewell. She left her last words in broken Chinese, then turned and left the nursing ward. Richard looked at her back. His heart was in turmoil, and tears welled up again. He knew that he had lost the person he loved most forever, and all this might be the most severe retribution for the wrong things he had done in the past. Richard was lying on the hospital bed, and the knife his ex-wife and stabbed almost pierced his heart. Every breath was like tearing his body apart, pain spreading through every cell. He wanted to stand up and chase her, but his body didn't give him a chance. He could only roll off the bed helplessly, knocking over the food that the nurse had just brought. Tears overflowed from his eyes and slid down his pale face. At this moment, Richard felt that he was abandoned by the whole world and fell into endless darkness. However, far from where Richard was in despair, David and Stella's story continued. 3 years passed quickly, and their world changed silently. Time always passes quietly, and during this period of time, their lives and state of mind have quietly undergone profound changes. Stella returned to Africa again. This time, she did not come as an entrepreneur, but as a special guest at the ceremony for the construction of a new base for the medical aid team in Africa. For the past 3 years, she has donated money to the medical team in her personal name every year. Although the amount is not much, it is like a lamp, illuminating the barren land of Africa and bringing hope to the countless doctors who are fighting for life. The old captain went to the airport to greet her personally, his face full of gratitude and respect. "Stella, thanks to your support, our medical team is in a much better situation than before, and it has also helped the medical cause here. All of this is really because of you." Stella smiled and waved her hands. No, it's your hard work as doctors that is most important. I am just trying my best to help." She followed the old captain to the new base, and just as she reached the door, she saw the familiar figure. David was wearing a white coat, and his tall figure was still there, but his expression looked calmer and more mature than before. 3 years have passed, and the years seem to have made him more mature, but this change makes him look stronger, as if he can handle any storm with ease. Stella stared at him intently, and suddenly a surge of emotion surged in her heart, as if warm sunshine was shining into her heart that had not been soothed for a long time. However, just as her eyes rested on David, a figure suddenly entered her field of vision. Xian Xing walked over holding a child in her arms. Her long, soft hair swayed gently with her steps, and a familiar, gentle smile appeared on her face. Stella frowned slightly, feeling vaguely uneasy. "Stella, come and see our new base." The old captain's voice broke her thoughts. Stella forced a smile, retracted her gaze, and followed him in. However, David noticed Stella's reaction. He looked at her, then turned and walked over with a gentle smile on his face. "Stella, thank you for your support over the past 3 years. I really appreciate it." Stella nodded, stretched out her hand to shake his, and whispered, "This is what we should do." Although the words were plain, a surging wave was stirred in her heart. She didn't expect that after 3 years, the distance between her and him seemed to be getting farther and farther. "David, please hold Paula for a while. I'll go make milk for her," Xian Xing said to David with a smile. Her tone was gentle, and the child in her arms, with dark skin and curly hair, made Stella's mood suddenly complicated. Some uneasy thoughts flashed through her mind. Xian Xing saw her reaction and immediately laughed. "Stella, don't worry, I can't give birth to a child of Guinean descent." Stella breathed a sigh of relief and took a closer look at the child, only to realize that this was just a local African child with a different skin color from theirs. The uneasiness in her heart disappeared immediately. After all, she already knew the relationship between Xian Xing and David very well, but there was always a fantasy in her heart that she was unwilling to admit. David saw her subtle reaction and gently explained, "Paula's parents died in the earthquake last month, and our medical team rescued her. Due to the imperfect local welfare system, she can only be fostered in our team now." Stella nodded slightly, and the stone in her heart finally fell to the ground. She had long known that Xian Xing and David had a special relationship, but today, all her fantasies were finally shattered by reality. She finally realized that she should let it go. After dinner, Stella, under the influence of alcohol, mustered up the courage to ask, Dr. Liu, have Xi and Xing and you ever thought about the future? Don't you plan to go back and settle down? David smiled, without a trace of hesitation in his eyes. How can there not be one? Everyone has his own moon in his heart. I am here now and I am living a good life. Hearing this, Stella felt a sense of loss. She thought she might still have a chance, but reality swallowed up her expectations bit by bit. David has found his own answer, and it is time for him to let go of his unrealistic fantasies. The ribbon-cutting ceremony of the new base was held as scheduled. David handed Paula to Stella and said with a smile, "Come, hug Paula. She is our mascot." Stella took Paula, but the little one just happened to poop. The smell made her a little stunned, and then she couldn't help laughing. The photographer captured this scene, and this photo later became a classic of the ceremony that day. That night, Stella sat in the car, looking down at the photo on her phone. In the photo, David was holding Paula, smiling brightly, with warmth in his eyes. At that moment, Stella gradually felt calm in her heart. She knew that everything was over, and she should let go of the past and pursue her own future. She picked up her phone and called her secretary, "I am stepping down as CEO." She knew that her life should change direction. Although she had enough money to live an easy life for the rest of her life, she was no longer satisfied with it. She sold the company, resigned from all her positions, and decided to invest the rest of her time into more meaningful things. She came to Africa and built a Hope primary school near the medical team base. She devoted herself to this barren land and wanted to provide children with a better education and future. Initially, Stella did almost everything herself, taking care of everything from the school's construction and management to the coordination with the local government. However, as time went on, the primary school gradually grew and attracted more social forces and donations. Whenever the media interviewed her, they always praised her selflessness and love. Stella always smiled and answered modestly, "I just want to get closer to the moon in my heart, closer and closer." She knew that this primary school was a symbol of the moon in her heart, and along the way, she finally found her true goal.